Good morning, everybody. We took a couple of weeks off. Adrian went surfing, and that's okay. Surfing's cool. Um, we're going to pivot a little bit today and start talking about what we in Sakai call entities. Um, Sakai has a service-oriented architecture, and so the gradebook service exists. And if you want to put a grade in, you call an API. And then inside that API, it finds its way into a database. If LTI, for example, so I work in LTI, I don't care about the database schema. I don't care about the database structure. I simply know that there is an API present somewhere in the JVM that I can call. And so it means that for better or for worse, it means that, each island that we have of functionality, and as we're building this new pages tool, we're building a new kind of silo of functionality. We're going to greatly discourage, even if prohibit, like some other tool, like the gradebook or assignments, from selecting from the pages tables, right? The contract between the pages tool and the rest of Sakai is not based on its data model, because we want to be able to evolve that. And over history, we've had some major evolutions of data models underneath the services. And those things sometimes take a long time. But in general, most of the rest of Sakai can ignore that work. And so Earl, a couple of years back, redid the assignments service. Had a lot of XML in its storage and hadn't put columns in where it should have. It wasn't a well-defined database back from 2002 through 2003. So Earl just said, like, I'm going to fix this. And so he did it all inside the assignment service, and he refactored it. He created a conversion for it. He created a bunch of unit tests for it, and it took a while. And every once in a while, there are little things that kind of percolate out, but things that talk to the API. But in the final analysis, the majority of the work was isolated into the assignments tool. So Earl could, in the assignment service, and so Earl could sort of drag that along and just keep working on it and working on it and working on it. And finally, he just dropped it in. And the rest of us are like, oh, great, it's there. And Adrian, you did a refactor of the gradebook, right? Um,
Yeah,
and to some degree, most of us were mostly isolated. Part of the thing that made things a little different in the gradebook is you were also refactoring between two services, kind of what's in the gradebook service, what's in the assignment service, and
yeah. Mhm.
and so, but even then, so that this whole notion of service-oriented architecture inside of Sakai, not the coin of the realm, as it were APIs and implementations of those APIs, which are persisted in databases, but we just don't broadly expose the databases. Even, for example, in Sakai, when you are site stats tool, which is the tool that says, oh, this many students watched this video, this many students were online for this long. That actually is not looking straight at any of the databases, any of the database tables that for the conversations tool or the pages tool, or the resources tool. That's all done by an eventing system where conversations spins out an event when something happens. Login spins out an event. Logout spins out an event. And so these events are ways for these kind of silos of service to interact with sideways with the rest of the system. And the same with search. So search, when you do a search, the search has, Elasticsearch, and it uses Elasticsearch and it makes an index. But Elasticsearch, that search code does not then go look in the tables of each of the services. The services are responsible to export. And the same is true of like copying a site from one semester to another semester, where it's not like the code doing the site copy looks at the database for conversations and looks at the database for gradebook and looks at the database for assignments and looks at the database for resources. It says, hey, resources, I'm in the process of copying you from site X to site Y. Help me out here. And so again, there's this whole like delegating of what I think of as side to side kind of interactions, not top to bottom interactions where you're just like showing a grade. So you call an API to get the grade. This is a side to side thing where search, site stats, and other things are looking sideways at this. And this all comes down to like, we all kind of have one word that captures this notion, and it's basically the entity system. And that is that each of these services controls an entity, and there's almost like a URL namespace for these entities, and you register into the entity space, and then that's how it all works. And I'll be honest, I'll be honest, but that this is one of the more complex bits of Sakai. But if you're going to use a service-oriented architecture, there and not just use the database as in effect the final thing between all the pieces of Sakai, you've got to build something like this. And it's been built in from the beginning in Sakai, and it's good boundaries make good neighbors, and so the entity broker is the boundary to your next door neighbors, right? So you can think of a storefront as the API that you're consuming, and then your two stores next door to each other. Every once in a while, you got to send something back and forth between those. And with that as intro, I will turn it over to our professor of the day, Adrian. So I hope I didn't get anything wrong in that, Adrian. So let you take it away.
No, spot on, right. So, yeah, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Dr. Chuck mentioned the coin of the realm there, right? So, today what I'm going to talk about, and I'm going to show, we're going to look through a few interfaces in Sakai, right? And we're going to talk about what those interfaces are used for, and like, the whole fabric of Sakai's entity system is based on a set of interfaces, right? That tools can optionally, implement, right? And then register themselves as having implemented, right? And then you can access those tools in different ways to our entity broker or entity manager system, yeah. But the coin of the realm really, for me, is a reference. So I'll briefly talk about that before I start looking at code, right? So each tool in Sakai, right, has got its own kind of like set of database tables, right? Usually they do. Not every tool in Sakai has database stuff, but let's say they do, right? So every tool has got its own set of database tables. Every tool in Sakai is aware of how to manipulate those database tables. So this is the separation of concerns that Dr. Chuck was just talking about. We try to keep the awareness of database structure to the tool, right? And then it's up to the tool to provide an API onto its stuff, right? The API, when you call it, it calls into the tool's code. The tool knows how to deal with its own stuff, right? So it's all kept kind of safe-ish, right? You've not got external, other tools in Sakai messing around with another tools like database stuff and potentially causing a bit of havoc in there, right? Yeah, I won't talk any more about that. I can go on about that. I can go on about Hibernate and the different kind of like JDBC approaches we use it and how they could cause chaos, but I'm not going to do it at the moment, right? So each tool has got its own tables, right? Now, each table has usually got something like a primary key, right? So that primary key, it could be a long, right? It could be like an auto sequence, right? Or it could be a UUID, right? But that's up to the tool. That's up to the tool to kind of decide how it wants to do that stuff, right? The issue across all of the Sakai instance, right, with multiple tools, right? If you're using things like a long, like a sequence for your primary key, obviously that is not unique across all the tables across Sakai. It's only unique for that one table, right? Vertically, yeah. So this is where the idea of a unique identifier for something comes in, right? And in Sakai, we call that a reference, right? So a reference is just a string, right? So, but a reference should be unique across Sakai, right? It should be unique. And a reference usually identifies a piece of content or something, right? So going back to assignments, right? So an assignment is what we call an entity in Sakai. Right? An assignment is a Sakai entity, right? So, and an assignment has a unique reference which identifies it, right? Across time and probably space, right? Because I think we're using UUIDs in there as well, but it's got a unique identifier called a reference, and it's just a string, and it looks a bit like RESTy, right? If you look at a reference, and we will do in a moment, yeah. A reference will be, I'm not exactly sure what they are in assignments, but I think it's like slash assignments slash the type of assignment slash some kind of UUID or whatever, right? Well, that reference can be stored in a database. It can be published in an event. It can flow around. It can flow around Sakai, right? And anything that receives that reference or holds that reference in its own database tables, right, can basically look up that entity, right, and retrieve it. Okay. But the point is, a reference is unique, so we can use multiple different ways of doing primary keys in our data structures. It doesn't matter, right? Because the thing that's exposed, if you implement the entity system, the entity interface is the reference, and that reference we can use it for search indexing. We can use it for events.
Let me throw something in here.
Go
You
on.
said the word reference a lot. I just want to make it clear that reference is a string. And so in a sense, the reference is a serialization of the primary key, plus the table, plus the service, plus all this other stuff.
Yeah,
So it's basically, and when you said you can store it in a database, you can put it in an event, and that's because it's a string. And like
yeah,
a URL, it's a long string. I mean, not a string of long, but it's just a string can have many characters that has a syntax inside of it that allows it to be parsed so that you can eventually figure out where it came from, any other data that's in it, et cetera. And it's mostly opaque to the rest of the systems, although some systems start parsing each other's references. Some parts of the system parse each other's references for one reason or another, like the site stats tool would
yeah.
probably begin to dig deeper into references. A lot of tools just move them around without in an opaque way, much like a URI would be in sort of a REST web service. Okay, and back to you, back to live action.
Yeah, that's right. And you raise an interesting point there, which I was kind of thinking about earlier today. A reference is not dissimilar at all to a REST endpoint, right? Like in the ideal world, for me now, if I was implementing these various, implementing the entity stuff in various tools, I would try and make it so that you could get a reference and just stick API in front of it, right? And then fetch it, right, in JavaScript, and then you just get it, right? Do you know what I mean? That'd be great because they are very, very similar. Like a lot of references, again, we'll look at some in a moment. They look almost like a REST, folder structure, right? Like cabinet drawer structure, right? Like we have in REST, yeah. Um, what else do I need to talk about before we start looking at some code? Yeah, so we have the idea of a reference, and we have the idea of something called the entity manager, right? The entity manager handles references, and the entity manager will ask tools. It'll say, do you understand this reference? Do you understand this reference? Is this your reference? Is this your reference? And eventually a tool will say, yes, that is my reference. And then the entity manager will say, well, give me that thing, right? And then the tool, right, it knows how to locate that thing via its own APIs and stuff, right? And it will literally go and find that thing, it'll retrieve it, and it'll send it back to the entity manager. Okay. Now let's look at some of these interfaces. A particular thing I'm going to talk about today is something I've been working on for the last couple of weeks, right? I've been working on some site import stuff. So I want to show people one of our entity interfaces, which is used as part of site import, right? Because what we'd kind of like to do is we'd like people to maybe get involved with that kind of stuff and improve site import across some of the tools in Sakai. It's a good cohesive kind of job that people can maybe get on with if they understand it. Which hopefully at the end of this they are going to do, right? So I'm going to share my screen now, and we will do a bit of a whistle-stop tour of the entity APIs. Share my console and
So one of my problems with all this is I don't do it often enough to kind of know this by heart. So I find myself forever going into code and putting print statements in, and I'm like, oh, that's
yeah,
how it works. And so I'm forever reminding myself how this works, and
yeah,
at
same.
some point, maybe, maybe what we really need for ourselves is a little better documentation for this so that, we can all, and again, that's because like 95% of development does not involve the entity manager, right? 95% of the development is you're doing your thing and you're sticking stuff in tables and writing unit tests, and none of that's really entity manager. But then when you start
Yeah,
doing site copy, then you have to do entity manager, and you're like, I
yeah,
need to read Adrian's guide to the entity manager, or just watch a 30-minute video again to save me putting all the print statements in and wasting 3 hours. I could just record that and say, but let's keep going. So that's cool. I mean, I have to come up to speed on this every time I get near it because I just don't remember it.
yeah, yeah. I'm very similar. So yeah, there is that there. I go and look at all the pieces of code, which is what I'm going to do now, right? So I'm going to go through the process now of just refreshing my knowledge of entity manager and entity producers and things like that. So initially we'll focus on looking at the assignments tool, right? And the interfaces that are in the kernel, right? That the assignments tool is implementing, right? And hopefully we'll that'll clear things up a little bit for us, get us warmed up, right? Okay, yeah. So that's what I'm going to do. So first of all, I'm going to show you some stuff in the kernel, right? Yes. Okay. So I'm in Sakai kernel, right? This is where all the entity stuff lives. As a matter of fact, you can see I've been in there. I've been looking at something called entity transfer. So what I'll do is I'll go straight into that directory there. Entity API. Okay, cool. Okay, right. Okay. So I've just done an LS there, right? So, how do I start with this? Let's initially look at entity producer. Right. So these are all the entity interfaces. This is the entity API, right? If you're writing a tool inside Sakai and you want it to interact with things like search and stuff like that, right? You're going to have to implement some of this stuff in here. You don't have to implement all of it, but you have to implement some of it, right? Some of the interfaces in here are what you would call maybe capabilities, right? Extra stuff, or marker interfaces, right? So entity producer is the main, is the big one to say, you are a provider of entities, right? You are a producer of entities. So the assignments tool can produce entities like, an assignment or an assignment submission or whatever, right? That kind of stuff, yeah. To actually do that, you have to implement entity producers. So I think we'll start there, right? It's worth looking at some of these interfaces. I mean, I found an interesting one the other day, which I had never heard of before, called Content Exists Aware, and not one single tool implements it. Okay, it's just there, right? It was added by Steve Swinsberg, and it's a cool little interface, but nothing has ever implemented it. So maybe a contrib tool somewhere, but nothing in Corsica. I'll show you that in a sec. Right. Okay. So let's look at entity producer, right? Because this is kind of like the linchpin kind of interface that we have. Right. Entity producer. So we've got something called a label, right? If you look at the Java doc, so a short string identifying the resources kept here, good for a file name or a label, right? So if you had a UI, you might want to list entity producers and that label would show up in your UI or whatever, right? Um, okay, this is old stuff, right? I would probably ignore these. These maybe should be deprecated at some point. I don't know if we're still using all the archive stuff, but this is around zipping and unzipping content into Sakai and out of Sakai into a zip file, right? And this has been around since back in the day, like a long time, yeah. Archive and merge. If you wanted your tool, your tool is aware of its content, it's got a database full of content. If you wanted your tool to participate in Sakai's archiving and re-importing mechanism, you would implement these interfaces, these APIs, archive and merge, and they're all based on XML, as you can see by this stuff, right? Don't worry about that at the moment, okay? Right, this is a good one. This is a good one, right? So if you implement this in your tool, what you're basically doing is you are offloading awareness of references from the entity manager into your tool. You're keeping it inside your tool. Entity manager will use this. It'll call this and it'll say, "Oh, can you pass this? Is this yours?" This is kind of the question. Is this yours? Is this yours? Right? So your tool would implement this, and I'll show you this in a second in the assignments tool. Your tool would implement this method, and it'd look at the reference, and it'd go, "Yeah, that's my reference. That's an assignment submission, right?" And then it'd return true to this, and then the entity manager would be like, "Great, I've found the producer of these references, right? So I'm going to ask for the reference." Entity description again. You see this reference thing. Okay, so we've got these references moving around. Get entity resource properties. This is basically saying, I don't want the entity itself. I just want the properties for that entity, right? Whatever properties it's got attached to it, please send me those, right? As a resource properties object. Again, there's a reference. You'll notice that we've got default implementations for all these now, right? Now we can do that, which is really nice because you can basically implement just part of this interface, the bits you want, right? And you don't have to implement all of it, and you don't have to have the the kind of base implementation of the interface pattern that people used to do all the time, right? So you'd have like an entity producer, and then you'd have abstract entity producer, right? Which does all this stuff. Do you know what I mean? Like this. That's what everybody used to do. You'd have an abstract entity producer, and abstract this, and then you'd extend that, right? We don't have to do that anymore. We've got these
Adrian,
default. Yeah,
Adrian, that whole default thing,
yeah.
did that come in a particular version of Java? Is that new?
I think it came in 8, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. Could have been
So
5 even, It could have been even 5. You know what I mean?
yeah, the idea. So you're saying the whole base pattern, you can just drop these into effectively the API, right? That's what this is.
Yeah,
You're making an interface and you're
yeah.
basically providing, instead of just an empty thing, your interface looks more like a class with defaults that are overridable.
Yeah, default's the key word. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, cool. That I think that's really pretty, honestly. That's way prettier than an interface, than a base implementation,
Oh,
and
yeah. Less boilerplate, we like that, don't we? It's good.
less boilerplate. We like that a lot. Okay.
We do. Um, yeah. So as I mean, for I think every single method in here probably has one of those on it now. Will archive merge false. So your tool, will not automatically archive merge unless you say, yes, I'm going to return true from this method in my implementation, So they're all kind of safe.
Could you do a get blame on this really quick and see who added the word default
It's
and when
me,
it was added?
me. I did it.
Oh, you did this.
Yeah. I did,
Oh,
yeah.
okay. Okay.
I did it as part of some of the search work I was doing, I think, if I remember rightly. Yeah. I can do a get blame if you want, but I'm pretty sure it was me.
No, no, no. I believe you. I believe you. I just what's cool to me is, that's one weird thing about working on Java for 20 years, right? Java as a language has changed a lot, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
and 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 in 2007, it felt like Java was a really bad choice as a way to write software.
Yeah.
Um, that's me in 2008,
Ian Boston there.
putting in the
Uh, yeah, hang on.
putting
So
in. I put the license in. I updated the license.
there
Sure.
you go. Default Adrian Fish.
Adrian Fish. There you go.
Adrian Fish. There you go.
Yeah, a lot of folks in UK working on that code base.
Yeah. So Ian Boston, Matthew Bucket, and that, yeah, exactly.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So the good news about that is we don't have to go abstract entity producer. We don't have to implement all this stuff in our tool, right? You can pick and choose to a degree which things you actually want to return. You may not want to return entity description. You may not care about returning the label, right? Um, they're not that important. The important thing is get entity, right? This is the big one, right? So this is the method that Entity Manager will eventually call, assuming that parse entity reference returns true, which is this your entity? Is this your thing? Is this your reference, right? Yeah, it is great, right? Get entity. Yeah, so then the entity manager will then call get entity on that, right? And it would return your assignment or your assignment submission, right? And then entity manager will return that to the caller, the initial person that, the initial code that called against entity manager. So it's like, there's a bit of a, it's a broker, right? It's a broker. Identity manager is like a broker. It brokers objects and it passes them back to the caller. Yeah. So get entity is the thing that you would implement. Coming down here again into some interesting stuff down here. This is something that I added to make search nicer. I overloaded get entity URL, so you could actually pass it this enum, right? Saying I want a portal URL or I want an access URL, all right? Things like that. So we don't have to talk about those at the minute, but the basic implementation of get entity URL usually returns this kind of like weird, strangely broken looking fragment of HTML that represents kind of like an announcement or an assignment. But sometimes what you want is the full portal URL, right? Because when people click it, you don't want to send them off into this strange ether, this strange inner space of like markup, right? You want them to think, right, I'm still in the portal. I'm still in the portal. I'm still inside Sakai. I've not gone off somewhere on a random journey somewhere, right? Yeah, but these are all optional interfaces, right? You don't have to implement all of these, yeah. But I'm just showing you the basics here, right? Get entity RC groups. I don't think I've ever implemented that one. Right. Okay, so that is the entity producer, right? So what I will do now is I will just shimmy across to the entity manager. And then we'll go to assignments after this and show you some actual implementation of these things, right? So entity manager, right? So you see this method here, right? Get entity, right? That is the method that a tool would use. Like, let's just imagine, right? There's a tool called, bacon, right? And the bacon tool wants to get an egg, right? So the bacon tool, all it has is a reference to it, /eggs /egg ID or whatever, right? So like the bacon tool will go, I've got this reference. I got it in an event or something, but I wouldn't mind getting that egg, right? So the bacon tool will go to the entity manager. It'll say get entity and it'll pass the egg reference to it, right? Entity manager will go, oh, okay, I'll ask my producers, who manages this, who's aware of this thing, right? And the egg service will come back and say, yeah, that's mine. And then entity manager will call it, and then it'll return it from this method here back to the caller, back to bacon, right? So bacon's happy, bacon's got an egg, yeah. Uh, entity producers, right? So Okay, this is a good one here. Look at this one. So register entity producer. And this is a pattern you'll see a lot in Sakai, right? Where we have instead of using like Spring's auto wiring, which you can kind of do to a degree now, right? You can auto wire things based on the interface kind of fingerprint, right? Where Spring will go, oh, there's all these things that produce that thing. I'll wire them into this array, this list somewhere. Yeah, that's newer stuff, right? There's a lot of code in Sakai which uses this pattern, right? So you'll have a service which will have a method on it saying register your thing here, right? And then when you're writing your tool and your service, right? So in this case, you're writing an entity producer, right? You're going to say, here's my entity producer. Please, store it somewhere or whatever, right? And call me later, right? So that's this function here. Again, I'll show you this in a second in assignments.
A key thing about this register entity producer is it's kind of done once when the service kind of comes up.
Yeah,
When Sakai's coming up, then it brings up all the services, and as part
yeah,
of their initialization, they register themselves. So it's not like there's registers like on every lookup or every
oh,
whatever,
yeah,
every page view. This is
yeah,
part of the complete initialization of Sakai, where it's
yeah.
kind of
Once,
wiring itself
once.
together. And this register entity producer is really doing nothing more than making an array of entity producers that the entity manager is going to loop through when it's trying to resolve an entity. And
Yeah,
it's at its base, it's a very simple concept, right? You got an array of these things, and when you're trying to look a thing up and it's just a string, you're like, what is this? The eggs, it's slash eggs. And then you go, well, I got an array of all the things that have registered themselves as having something to do with entities. I'll check with all of them.
yeah,
And it seems like that might be like inefficient, but really there might be 40 of them, and you're really just looking for a string. And
yeah.
the string
That's
get
it.
looked at 40 times, and one of them will say, yes, I am the eggs producer. So, so there you go.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
And
Yeah,
so
exactly. So
this register pattern, like Adrian says, happens all over the place, where you have a series of alternatives and you make an array of alternatives. And then when you want to figure out which one applies, you just go through and ask them, like, is it you? 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 And then one of them says yes, and then you know which one it is. And that's a way to kind of deserialize a completely flexible format that each of the entity producers gets to decide what their reference looks like. And we just outsource everything back down to those entity producers through this registration pattern. And
yeah,
I'll
exactly,
back to you.
Yeah, and that helps us to keep things relatively uncoupled, right? Not too tightly coupled, yeah, which is always a good thing. Like I say, with Spring now, and we are starting to make forays into using Spring's abilities to auto wire things, right? So with Spring, if you have an interface on something, right, and you have another Spring being somewhere else, which has an array of those interfaces and the auto wired annotation, Spring will actually try and scan when Spring's initializing, right? When Sakai comes up and Spring's initializing its application context, it'll try and scan all of the beans that it's aware of for those interfaces. Try and map them in to arrays wherever they're needed, right? So in theory, this kind of pattern of register X, Y, or Z will maybe slowly drain away in the Sakai code base as the years go by. But for the moment, it's a good pattern. It's not a bad pattern, and it's good, But if you don't need to do it, you don't need to do it, right? If Spring does it for us, then Spring will do it for us. Anyway, I'm digressing there, right? Okay. Yeah, there's things like new reference, right? So the entity manager will create a reference object, right, which is like a wrapper around your string, basically. You don't need to worry about any of that stuff. We'll look at the implementation of entity manager in a little while, but first of all, we'll go across to assignments. So we've looked at entity producer and we've looked at entity manager, right? Yeah, what I'll do is I'll go across to assignments now, I think. Just need to move Windows out of the way again. The four ways, you know. Go away. That's it, good. Okay, cool. Yes. So here I am. Right. Right. Okay. So I'm now across in the assignments tool. Right. Um, what was I going to say? I was going to say something before and it's slipped away from me. Yeah, that's right. So yeah, so it's worth pointing out, right, that you don't have to use the entity manager. You don't have to use it. You don't have to write your tool code to use it, right? And this is kind of good, but it's also been kind of bad because a lot of people don't understand the entity manager and the documentation hasn't been written, maybe clearly enough for the entity manager because you don't have to use the entity manager. So people have just kind of like maybe slipped to the side of it, right? So it's a pro and a con. But the good thing about the entity manager is it's another level of decoupling, right? You don't have to wire in the assignment service to get an assignment, right? You can just call the entity manager with a reference and you'll get that assignment object. Do you know what I mean? So it's like there's two different ways of getting out of tools content in Sakai. One's the direct assignment service, wire it in, call it. The other one is using the entity manager. Two parallel systems, really.
You could almost think of it as like a global foreign key, right? Which means, you can be anywhere in Sakai and have an entity reference, which is really nothing more than a string. And you can store that in your table somewhere,
Yeah,
right? And so if
yeah,
we're in pages and we wanted to like have a foreign key to assign an assignment that's associated with this page, we could stick a column, big long string column in our pages table and store the reference there. The
yeah,
point is you can't really join on that because it's just a big ugly multi-level string, but you can at the point where you're finally looping through the pages and you want to like show the associated assignment,
mm,
you can then say, hey, assignment service, I got this big long, well, you could say, hey, entity manager, I've got this big long foreign key and find which service it goes to and let me talk to that service. And so you could think of it as in a sense textually a textual serialization of a foreign key that's deep in a service that you don't have direct access to.
yeah, exactly. So we're doing it through code, right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Right. Okay. So let's have a look at the assignment service. So I'll kind of show you. I'll show you the. Okay. So this is the assignment service, right? It implements assignment service. It implements something called entity transfer, and it now implements something called content exists aware, right? So you may be thinking, well, where's entity producer, right? Well, entity producer, the assignment service interface extends entity producer. So I'll just kind of show you that. Again, you can do this in different ways. You could have had implements assignment service, entity producer here, entity transfer here, right? You don't have to extend it in the interface. Either way works. People do things in different ways. It could be just historical stuff. Anyway, so quickly hop across here, right? So interface assignment service. This is the main assignment API, right? If you want to get an assignment, you want to get a list of submissions for an assignment, whatever, right? Grades and stuff, right? That's in here. That's in the assignment service. So you could wire the assignment service into your other tool, right? You could wire it into your other tool, like the Pages tool. You could wire it in there as a Spring Bean, right? So assignment service or using the auto wire annotation, or you could use the entity manager to get hold of assignments. So it says it extends entity producer, right? Okay, so what this means is we would expect the assignment service implementer to have implemented some of those methods that we've just been looking at in entity producer. It doesn't have to implement all of them because we have the default keyword now on all the methods in there, right? So it could just say, oh, I extend entity producer and I'm not actually implement any of it, which would be kind of strange, but it does implement parts of it. So let's go and have a look at that. So assignment service implementer, right? So let's look at get entity. Okay, so the assignment service implements get entity description, right? We're marking it with an override annotation, which just kind of makes the code clearer, really. I think it's just a good way of, as you look through the code, you know that that's maybe an interface implementation or something like that. Get into the description takes a reference. We're switching on the subtype, saying, okay, if this is yes, that's reference get subtype, right? So a reference has different parts to it, right? So you see this reference object, yeah.
You
This
might
is what
want to start with the one above it, parse entity reference.
okay, yeah, all right, fine, yeah, okay, yeah, all right, let's do that. So parse entity reference. This is the call from entity manager. Entity manager is like, do you understand this entity reference? Is this yours? If so, return true. So in here, we're doing an initial check. Does it start with our reference root? So reference root is just, I think it's just slash assign. I'm not sure. I think it's just slash assignments, right? Reference root for the assignments tool, right?
Just a
So
string. It's just a
yeah,
string.
just a string, just a string. I think it's slash assignments. But so we say, okay, first of all, does it start with our reference root, right? If it doesn't, then we're just going to return false, straight off the bat, yeah. If it does start with that, we're using an approach like a builder pattern approach, right? Where we've kind of centralized our parsing code for the reference into a class. In this case, it's called assignment reference reckoner. So what assignment reference reckoner does, it just gives you one place. What you see often with this, you see an explosion, or loads and loads of places where people are doing exactly the same parsing of a reference. They'll go like, oh, split on substring on, slash assignments and blah, blah, blah. And it all gets messy and crazy, right? So this is a nice pattern. This is another nice pattern that I like to see more of, right? Where we have something called a reckoner. This reckoner, this is something introduced. Earl started doing this. And I think it's a really good approach to things. The reckoner understands all the components of an assignment's reference, right? So what we're saying to the reckoner is we're going, create me a reckoner, right? Set the reference on it, right? And then reckon. It's a builder pattern, but we're using the word reckoner instead of like build, right? Because it's not actually building. What it's doing is parsing and trying to grok what that reference is. It's trying to reckon what it is, right? So I think reckon's a decent word there, yeah. And that produces an assignment reference, right? And then on that assignment reference, we can just go get ID, get subtype, get whatever on it, right? Get context. It's all nicely split out for us by the reckoner, and it's put into some class fields in there, right? And some instance fields, I should say. And then we can use those. Yeah. So we're saying reference set this stuff, and we're returning true. So we've accepted that this is this reference belongs to us at this point, right? So the entity manager will be happy with either of these responses, right? But if you return true, it's going to start talking to you more, right? So if you return true, make sure you're ready for further conversation with the entity manager, because it will start talking to you, right? The next thing it's going to do, it may start calling these things, right? It may start calling get entity description. It may call resource properties. So you're seeing these things here, right? These are implementations of entity producer, right? This is entity producer stuff, yeah. I suppose you could put like a little Java doc, a little comment on there if you wanted, from entity producer. Because as your classes get massive, sometimes it is very hard, unless you're using an IDE, it's kind of, it gets hard kind of knowing which interface your method implementation comes from. And people used to do this more than they do now, where you go, / from entity producer or
Can
something
I
along
ask a
those
quick
lines.
clarification on the parse
Yeah,
part? If you go
yeah, let's
back
go
up
back
to the
up to
parse
it.
part, I should have asked you while you were there. That's really just string manipulation, right? There's no database access going on.
No,
That's a really cheap, inexpensive operation, right?
yeah,
Because it's really just a parsing operation. And that's
yeah,
because the the string that is the reference is a structured string where there is meaning in where something shows up in that string. And all we're doing
yeah,
is parsing it our way. And
yeah,
there's supposed to be certain things that are in every reference, like context is the site that it's in, right?
yeah.
And
Hmm.
so now
Yeah,
what we're doing is we're revealing to it's a kind of a reference is kind of an abstraction that might be a page, it might be an assignment, it might be whatever. You get to see what type it is, but there are
yeah,
lots of things that are common across references, like what site is it part of, right?
yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
so,
But
that
but but the caveat to that is there's no guaranteeing where in the reference that site ID is.
we're in the
We've not,
string part, right? In the string
yeah,
part of
where,
the reference, right?
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly where in the string part it is exactly. So this is why we have to have this reckoner thing. Now,
right,
if we'd have stuck to some hard conventions, right, we'd be like, right, the context is the second part of the string, right?
right.
After the,
And
like,
it commonly is, right? The context is
yeah,
pretty early in the string, but
yeah,
the point is it's up to the service to decide the format. If I was going to add a comment to this, I would have a little thing for Chuck that's like references look like this. One line that's like slash this, slash that, slash
yeah,
that. And
yeah.
I
An
might put
example,
another one like say 0 is the slash assignments and 1 is the context ID and whatever, and
yeah,
maybe that comment is in the reckoner right now, where it's the reckoner just knows to split it and knows what pieces to look for. And the thing is the reckoner knows it because we made it inside this service. We concatenated all those things together and then handed the
yeah,
big string back to be this like global foreign key.
yeah,
And then, we rest wasn't quite the thing when we were doing this in the beginning.
yeah,
And you might
exactly.
start calling this a URI in a modern day, right? A uniform
Yeah,
resource identifier.
yeah.
You know,
Slap API in front of it and fetch it, and you've got it, right?
yep.
Yeah, that kind of thing. Yeah, no, that. Yeah, it feels like that's kind of the direction we're going. Um, so yeah, the reckoner also can generate references. So like let's just this pattern of a reckoner, right? It cuts both ways. It'll parse a reference, but it usually what you'll do is you'll make that code where it can actually create a reference as well, right? So you'd set site ID on it, you'd set the assignment ID on it, you'd set some stuff on it, and then you go reckon, right? And then you would ask for its string representation of that, and you would get a reference back. So we can both generate the references and consume the references in this kind of pattern.
The
Now,
whole reckoner thing doesn't speak to me. I understand what it is. I would call it like pickle and unpickle, serialize and deserialize, really, because it's kind of like it's like pickling. But
yeah,
okay, I get it. I know what it does, and reckon is more of it knows things. It's a source of knowledge about syntax, and so you can ask it, right? It's like an assignment reference expert, assignment syntax reference expert.
yeah, exactly right. Yeah,
Tease.
yeah,
So Reckoner is kind of a fun way to capture that notion that it knows how to take them apart, and it knows how to put them together, and it knows,
yeah,
in a sense, the serialized form of our internal objects.
yeah,
It's not capturing everything of the internal objects, it's just capturing enough to go find them, when we
yeah,
need, which is what you're doing next.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. Right. Okay. So yeah. So after you've returned true from this, right, the entity manager is going to start asking you some more, well, it's going to pass on a request from the user, right? So get entity description, um, get entity resource properties.
Talk a little bit
So
about that case statement in there and what's going on in that case statement.
yeah, right. Okay. So these case statements, what we're an assignment reference is quite a complex complex beast, right? You can have a reference to just an assignment. You can have a reference to a submission. You can even have a reference to an assignment grade and things like that, right? So an assignment reference has quite a lot of small pieces of data in, and this is a very good place to actually mention and stress something here, right? You don't want to pour all your data in. You could pour loads of data into these strings, and sometimes people do, right? It's probably not a great idea because one tool's database column might be not wide enough to hold the size of reference you're generating, right? And everything goes plop, right? So what you should try and do is keep them kind of compact, right? And the pattern is a tool may want a reference to an assignment, right? Okay. It gets the assignment. Search is a classic example. It gets the assignment from the reference and then looks at the assignment a bit, right? It gets more information from the assignment. It might get the like an assignment submission. It might get the assignment submission and then look at who the submitter IDs are on that assignment submission, right? You don't have to encode all that stuff in a string, right? You just encode the basics, just a way of getting that reference, right? So there's usually two stages. You'll go, give me that entity to the entity manager. Entity manager, finds it, sends it back, and then your calling tool will inspect that entity then, right, for more information about it. And it might even call the assignment API at some point. I don't know, but the idea is don't embed everything in your reference, right? Just keep it so it's just a location. It's a URI, right? Like Dr. Chuck just said, right? It's a URI. Think of it like that, yeah. Okay, so the switch statement, yeah. So what all we're doing here is we're going, right, what's the subtype of this reference, okay? And we set things like the subtype up here in this stuff. What's the subtype? Actually, I should point this out, right? The reason you're doing this stuff, right? We're setting stuff on the reference, right? When we're happy that it is an assignments reference. It belongs to us, the assignments service, right? What we're doing is we're setting some kind of more accurate metadata on the reference object, because then the entity manager will supply that updated reference object to any further calls. So we've got more information in the service later, right? Get subtype is the perfect example. So we're going, what's the subtype of this? Is it an assignment? I don't know what that content one is. I'm not actually sure. These are the big ones though. Is it an assignment? If it's an assignment, get the reference and get it. So that's the string of reference. We're using references inside the assignment API actually because Earl wrote this and he does more references than anybody else, right? He's embraced the entity manager more than anybody else. So yeah, you call get assignment, we get the assignment.
Kind of overloading the word reference there. You say reference dot get reference.
Yeah, it's because basically
I would have named that, reference is the reference, which is a collection of, it's an object with some stuff in it, right? And get reference would probably be better to call get primary key or get key or something like that, because really that
it's a string.
It's a string, but it's a string that has meaning that eventually will be the thing that looks up the thing, right? That.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, though, I mean, yeah, I totally agree with you. It always kind of weirds me out. I mean, I'd be happy with reference dot to string. Do you know what I mean? Like
Well,
to
I don't know
string.
about that. ToString would be to display in a log or something. But if you look up at reference.set right above reckoner.getID,
Yeah.
that's setting the reference. It's just a weird name because the reference is the containing object, and one of the things within it is the reference, which really should have been called the key inside assignments.
Something. Yeah, I know. I agree with you. I mean, I do find it kind of strange myself.
But that's
But so
really reference.get reference is kind of like reference.get the primary key.
yeah, yeah. And what you're getting back from that call is you're actually getting, the original string reference slash assignment slash you're getting the whole thing back, right? The actual string representation of the reference.
Yeah. But
So
that
yeah.
get assignment is kind of looking it up by whatever assignments service thinks
Yeah.
of as its internal key.
Yeah.
And when it made the reference, it put its internal key in that place. So, okay.
Yeah. So if so, for instance, if a con if a consumer of this stuff had auto wired the assignment service in, they could have just called, get assignment with that reference string, and they would have got the assignment, But the entity stuff makes it so that you don't have to auto wire everything in. You can just use this entity bus to get access to the objects that you want, yeah, the entities that you want. Anyway, so yeah, we're switching on subtype and we're saying if it's an assignment, do this and just break, right? If it's a submission, get the submission, do that, break, right? And then we return the description. Yeah. That's all. That's it, right? So you'll see something similar down here, right? So again, we're switching on subtype, we're saying if it's an assignment, right, we load the properties up like this, right? If it's a submission, get the properties like return them, right? Get entity. You're going to see something, the patterns all the way through, right? If it's an assignment, create assignment. That's interesting. I wonder what that is there. Create assignment entity. Yeah. Should I dig into that? I wonder. I sound like the sorting hat now. Right. Create assignment entity. Is it Hufflepuff?
Well, no, that's just in effect the type of what you have to return is an entity. And
Yeah.
what that's saying is load the assignment in our whatever internal, and then in effect make a transfer bean, also known as entity, right? That's
Yeah.
because entity is a POJO. Entity is not an entity is defined by, oh, there you go.
Yeah. Yeah.
So to
There,
me, it
there
looks
it is.
kind of like your transfer bean pattern from before, where
Yeah.
it's kind of an internal representation and external representation.
Yeah.
It's kind of this is the moment of serialization. It's just we're
Yeah.
using weird terminology. We're using different terminology than your transfer bean technology to some degree.
Yeah. So this is a perfect example of Earl being cautious about moving Hibernate objects around the system, right? So technically you could say you could have made the assignment Hibernate POJO. You could have made that an entity itself, right? Because it's using the UUID as its ID. You could have actually made that the entity, but
Right.
that would mean that you're passing these live active objects around, right? That are participating in transactions and all that stuff. And like so, Earl's done the safe thing. I'm guessing this is Earl, right? Earl's done the safe thing here of basically creating just a transfer object, right? Assignment entity. Anyway, I just thought I'd flip down to that and see what's going on with that. Yeah, so get entity is it's basically it's creating this kind of wrapper thing, right? Around the entity, around the assignment, and that's what's getting returned, right? So we've not got a dangerous Hibernate, a Hibernate managed, POJO flowing around, right? So it's safe, nice and safe. So why is this to do assignment submission entities? Well, he's not implemented this here, right? So for some reason, um, for some reason, that's not been implemented. Obviously, the intention is to implement it.
Yeah, I could imagine
Uh,
there's just so think about this. Where else in the Sakai UI, other than the assignments tool, really is going to show a student's submission?
yeah, it's a good point. Obviously, nowhere.
Oh, it's not like the resources tool or the pages tool wants to show a submission, or even lessons might want to show a submission. But the
Yeah,
to do is, what if we wanted to? And what if we wanted to let lessons have ways to link to student submissions? That would be what you would be solving here. And I just don't think we have that need. And that's why
yeah,
this log warn doesn't pop up and no one's complaining. And it just says, hey, implement it. Really? You want to do this? What are you doing? And there might be, who knows, conversations tool might want this at some point. If you start imagining that Conversations wants to, as we start grading conversations more and more, you want to start having assignments associated with the conversation, and the student puts a submission in. I'm just making this up, right? But
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
why
yeah.
that's a to-do, is because I don't think there's any consumer for this. Now, I'm pretty sure that the ref type assignment is probably almost for sure consumed in lessons, right?
Yeah.
Meaning it has to be there. And so again, this is a good example of, if a person was going to need this in pages, for example, we'd be like, oh crap, we got to add a little bit of code to assignments to get the submission reference. Because in assignments, the submission is per student, right? So if you have like a Word document and your
Yeah.
assignment is write a paper and upload a Word document, the submission is each student's Word doc. So that's why it's just not essential right yet, but it gives an
No,
example.
it's not. And,
You
and
don't
like
have
you
to
say,
build. Yeah.
yeah, and like you say, I mean, for each of these things, you
If
need
on
some
the
kind
other
of
hand, if on the other hand, we were going to build a web service that was kind of generic, that looked at it like slash direct, for example, I bet that means that slash direct may not be able to, well, slash direct is different because slash direct has its own kind of inversion of control, right? But okay, if we were to build like a entity manager web service general purpose, then all of a sudden you would want to give submissions to that web service so that you could build whatever. So, okay,
yeah,
I'll be
yeah.
quiet now. I've distracted us.
No, no, it's fine, it's fine. Yeah, yeah, and like what I suppose a kind of interesting thought about that is like, if you need UI support for these things, so you could say, well, get a submission, and then you ask the assignment service for the markup for that submission in some way. If we had a standardized markup framework across Sakai, you, you go, I want the submission, and then please render it for me as well into this and return this fragment. Anyway, yeah. Dreams.
Yeah,
Right.
what if we wanted search to be able to, for a teacher to be able to search every student submission?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? That would be you'd have to do this. Now, probably they decided not to put that into search quite yet,
Yeah.
or
Well,
to
it's
implement it inside
search is a
assignment.
little bit. Yeah, search is a little bit kind of sideways from the main
Yeah,
entity producer stuff, right? It's like got its own kind of little entity thing going on, which we'll dig into. I mean,
yeah. Okay.
Dr. Chuck warned you all. He warned you all at the beginning that this is quite complex stuff, and it is quite complex stuff. It's been in Sakai since the early days. It's anyway, yep. It's a deep dive. It's a deep dive. Okay, so I think that is no, look at this one here. Right? There's another one here, right? So yes, exactly. Perfect, perfect. So these are also from Entity Producer. Um, these are the URL things I was telling you about, right? So this one here, right? This is something that I added for search. So search has a reference and it's index stuff, right? In Elasticsearch, right? It'll have a reference in there, right? So when you when you show when you want to show that a link to that assignment, what we'd do is we'd call this method here, right? So the entity manager would call this method, it would call get entity URL, right? And the assignment service runs through this code, right? This is all internal assignment stuff. So because we have multiple frameworks, UI frameworks in Sakai, right? You can't. There's not one single. Felix, Felix, can you go shut the door, please? Sorry about that. Yeah, that's my son's dog just kind of invaded the room. Right. So get entity URL. Yeah. The assignments tool is aware of how to access its own data its own content via a URL, right? The various tools across Sakai may have different ways of deep linking into stuff. Yeah, so we have Java server faces tools, we have velocity tools, we have front end tools, Wicket tools, right? We've got all these different front end frameworks that have cohabited inside Sakai for years, and they work perfectly well with each other, but they all often have different ways of deep linking into content. So I was looking at stuff in search. I thought, how can we kind of start to normalize, the result you get from clicking a link anywhere in Sakai, right? So I added this method to Entity Producer, get into the URL. And what that basically does, it returns a full portal URL to the assignment. So anywhere there's a reference in Sakai to an assignment, you can get a proper URL to that assignment, right? And when you click on it, the assignment tool will go to the proper place and it will show you that assignment, right? If you're a student, it'll show you a slightly different view of the assignment to what an instructor will see. And this deep link code handles that, right? Anyway, that's kind of, I
Can I
mean,
ask a quick question?
yeah, yeah.
Does that participate in what we do in the rich text editor in any way? Or that's just something you added for search?
For search, yeah, just for search at the moment. Yeah, it's not been widely deployed.
Can the rich text editor point at an assignment?
Um,
It's
when you
the
say point,
finder thing that's in the rich text editor that looks up stuff. I don't know if you can
I
say,
don't know. I don't actually know. It's not something I've looked at heavily. That
yeah, I tend to avoid the rich text editor. There's other people that are sort of specialists in it.
yeah,
But
yeah, because you got Yale Finder, haven't you, right? Which is something we're going to have to kind of embrace as part of the Pages tool, like heavily. So, but at
yeah,
the
we're going to
moment,
have to look at it before we're done.
it's true. It's true. Yeah.
It just seems like this entity URL stuff that you've kind of, for now, as a sort of specialized in search. I think that there may be ways to use it more broadly. And again, as a person who worked in the portal, this pattern of get a URL for a thing. Here's an object, get me a URL for it. That's a nice kind of core concept rather than having concatenation code schlepped all over the place, right?
Yeah.
And
Exactly. Yeah.
say,
Yeah.
if I'm in the plus portal, schlep this concatenation this way. And if I'm not in the plus portal, schlep the concatenation this other way. And
Yeah.
uh, and so this sort of notion of getting entity URL that you started because of search just seems like something that we could get better at using. And so get more of the pieces of Sakai to use this wisely, but then make it so that things happen in more consistent ways across all of Sakai, right? So
Yeah.
these are good patterns in general. And if you're
Yeah.
writing
Yeah.
something from scratch, like we might even find that we decide that inside pages, we decide that we are going to write this get entity URL code so that it works with search, but we'll also find ourselves building our own UI bits that could ask for the entity URL and then show it in our own UI rather than just showing it in search UI. But so meaning
Yeah.
we're creating something that's kind of expected to be consumed horizontally by our neighbors, but instead it's going to be so useful we'll consume it ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. Basically. Yeah. Yeah. I'm quite pleased with adding that method. It still makes sense when I look at it, which is a good thing. It doesn't look stupid. And we're using optionals as well, right? This is a good thing to kind of point out. You know what I mean?
Yep. Whenever I see optional, whenever I see I think of Adrian all the time. That may or not be fair, but I do.
That's all right. That's all right. That'll do. Okay, so when we were looking at entity producer, I was going, oh, what's this? Get entity or C groups, yeah. So we've got an implementation of it here. So let's have a look. Basically, let's have a look what assignments is doing. So we're grabbing the subtype. If it's an assignment, we are we're going in, we're doing some security checks. We're trying to unlock various functions. Remember, we looked at these in a previous video, right? When we were adding some security for the Pages tool, right? So hopefully people remember some of this stuff, right? Using this kind of unlock approach. We're saying unlock for this user ID, unlock this capability or function or permission for this site. Right? That's what that call is doing. So all it's doing is just getting the groups. So if it's a group assignment, we're grabbing the groups that are associated with that assignment. So it's like an assignment can be, like submitted by groups, right? But you don't have to really think about that too much. It's just one of the things the assignment tool does. And all it's doing is setting them on the reference. I don't actually know what that does, to be honest, but it's like I said there are a few kind of dark areas in this stuff for me, and there are. That's from the entity producer as well, get HTTP access. This returns like actually I don't know, that a zip thing there. Sorry, I'm kind of flapping a bit now. File name, it's returning a zip file. Interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. Bulk download. Interesting, because I thought the get HTTP access often return like just a kind of like a more or less a textual view of this is specific, right? So whoever's written this has written this to address a specific use case where we need the zip, and they've used the get HTTP access method to kind of house that code. It's quite interesting. Anyway, sorry, right. I
And
digress again.
that is really weird. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that I would tend to see in the access servlet, where you're trying to kind of send to the browser. I mean, right now it looks like this particular thing is kind of a variation on access servlet, right? Where it's actually producing a browser a response, a request response
Yeah, I think I
response.
think I think Access Server actually hits up these methods, get HTTP
Okay,
access.
that might be true. That might be true.
Yeah, so it's just funny that it literally is. It's
That,
only ever going to produce zipped content, rather
no,
than
but yeah, if you look at like the access servlet for LTI, you see that there's this thing called download all the LTI tools in this site in the admin thing, and it's all down in access servlet. For those watching, if you see a URL inside Sakai called /access, that's kind of a generic servlet that serves content in various forms. And so, like, if you upload a PDF and then you download it, you make a link to it in like files,
yeah,
you'll see that is /access. And access is another kind of pluggable part of Sakai. And so, access servlet itself, the access servlet that responds to /access /whatever, that has a registration, because it's like /access /the kind of thing you're looking for, probably usually site ID ////. And then that also then has a way of getting back to the service to figure out, like, someone's trying to download something or display it or whatever. How do you want to do that? And the service has to do that. And so some of this is happening right here. I mean, I've seen slightly different patterns where all the kind of case statements and stuff are all sitting in whatever access servlet calls. So, but this does look like it's being called from access servlet.
yeah. I mean, yeah, what's interesting about this again is that we've got slash access, slash direct, slash API, right? And like they're all kind of doing similar things, aren't they? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's and this is because Sakai was kind of glued together back in 2002 or whatever, right? And based on code that predated that, right? And so there's lots of different approaches to things, which all work together great, but we have got multiple ways of doing things. And part of the challenges of working as a Sakai developer is just trying to, you know, kind of normalize some of those differences as time goes by and reduce some of that, what we'd call technical debt, I suppose, or duplication, and this is why Sakai is such an interesting project to work on,
Yeah, I
because
mean,
there's a lot.
part of my goal in this whole teaching series is to get to the point where if we can use this teaching series to increase the number of resources on Sakai, we can maybe be patient and take some time. And if there's 3 ways to do something, then get down to 2 ways to do something, and get down to 1 way to do something, and then.
Yeah,
But that's a lot of resources, a lot of code. It's kind of fun code. It's difficult, but it's kind of cool when you can kind of see that there being something, the same kind of thing is being done 2 ways, and then you carefully look at it and you look at both ways of doing it and come up with 1 way, maybe improving the 1 way. Um, so and
yeah,
and the problem is that we spend a lot of time sort of going forwards rather than catching up with stuff. And I do want to get to the point where we have enough talent, enough resources that we can afford to catch up, right? And afford to have spare resources that can catch up with some of these. We did it 1 way in 2008 and we did a different way in 2015 kind of stuff.
yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. Right. So now I think what I'm going to do now is I'm going to switch gears slightly around. I'm going to look at site import, and I'm going to show you another interface from the entity family, right? Everybody should get the idea, right? This is an implementation of Entity Producer, and it allows other parts of the Sakai, kind of like Galaxy to get assignments without actually having to bring in the assignment service, right? Again, you can do it both ways. A lot of people do, but this is a good implementation of Entity Producer, and it's always worth referring to when you're writing your own stuff. But the thing I've been working on for the last couple of weeks is I've been doing some work on site import, trying to make site imports slightly more fine grained. So I'm going to show you another interface now, because um, I'd like people to actually have a look at this stuff and maybe help out if they can with improving some of this stuff. So that's what we're going to do. Right. So if I go back to so I'm back in the entity API, the set of entity interfaces. So I'm going to show you another interface. I'm going to show you two interfaces, in fact. So we've got something called entity transferer, right? And you get a special prize if you can work out what this interface does. Okay, no, I'll tell you, right. So it transfers entities. Yeah. So basically, the idea behind this interface is allowing us to copy content between sites for particular tools, right? So if a tool implements this interface, what the tool is basically saying is, right, you ask me what you want me to copy, right? And I will copy these entities between sites, right? I'll make sure I do that properly, and I'll kind of tell you when it's finished, right? So again, it's got a set of methods. There's no default on this because you have to implement this, right? Otherwise it's a pointless interface totally. So there's no defaults on a few of these things because they have to be implemented. Either implement them or just don't implement the interface. You don't waste your time. Um, so it's just a method. It's like transfer copy entities from context. That's what we've often called our sites, right? So we tried to make it more abstract in the past in case we didn't use sites, but we've always used sites really. So, this is like site ID playpen, right? To, site playpen 2 or whatever, right? This is a set of entity IDs. That's what these are. And it should tell you all entities will be imported. When null, all entities will be imported. Otherwise, all entities with those IDs will be imported. So often this will be null when this method is called, yeah. Yeah, a point worth making here, a point I have to make here now is entity transfer is a capability, right? So it's like you'll implement something like entity producer, right? You may not implement any of the actual methods on entity producer, but you'll say, I implement this. And you also implement entity transfer. So what the entity manager will do, or what other tools will do, is they'll check whether they'll say, oh, that's the entity producer. Is it an entity transfer as well? If it is, I want to transfer these entities, right? You know what I mean? So it's like a capability. It's like saying, yeah, I've got 3 legs or whatever, right? So transfer copy entities is what will eventually be called, and the tool that implements this method will then use its internal knowledge, right? It's through of its own stuff, right? And it will copy the entities between sites and doing whatever it needs to do to achieve that process, right? I think this stuff here is this is like a list of the IDs that got transferred, I think, which gets returned. So we have like a log. We can keep like a log of an audit of what entities were actually copied across. I'm going to show you some code in a minute, like some actual implementations. I'm just quickly going through this. There's a slightly different, an overloaded version of that method. With something called cleanup, right? This means when you pass this, it means I actually want to replace what's in the target. So what's in to context. So the site we're copying content into, we're saying, first of all, clean out the content for that tool from there. We're replacing it totally. So we've got these, overloaded methods, right, in here. I've got a default on that. You don't have to implement that. Yeah, so I'm using I think I added that default there. So I'm using these quite in the correct way, right? I've not put a default on this because what's the point in implementing this interface without implementing this method? But I have put a default on this. You don't have to implement the replace method. You don't have to, right? Yeah, what's this other stuff here? Gets transfer option. Right, this is something I've just added as part of this work I'm doing. I won't talk about that at the moment because it's not in master. It's currently in a branch that I'm working on. Get transfer options is saying it allows us to provide these string configurations to instrument how an entity is copied. So in the assignments tool case, when an assignment is copied, usually it'll be draft. But using this transfer options method, you can say publish all these things, all these assignments when they're copied, right? I'm digging in a little bit here, right? So what I'm going to show you.
That's still an important point, right? I mean, eventually you're going to show us the UI, I hope. And this UI has drop
Yeah,
downs and checkboxes. And that is a tool called the site copy tool. But all those checkboxes and drop downs are the presence of the checkboxes and drop downs is controlled by the assignment service. So this
yeah,
whole thing is about sort of delegating to the service that which belongs to the service, but then creating abstract ways for the rest of the system to get what it needs from the service without having to put like loads and loads of case statements in the actual tool that's doing the site copying. So you
Yeah.
just like, it's just a classic inversion of control. It's like, do you put for an if then else or a switch statement in the site copy where the switch statement is it an assignment? Is it a grade column? Is it a resource? Is it a conversation? And then having the code to pick what kind of transfer options you want for conversations, which is different than the code for what kind of transfer options you want for assignments, when you could just have conversations tell what the transfer options are, and then that gets displayed, and then have assignments show what transfer options. It's again just inside the assignment service. We want the rest of the system to be able to interact with all services in a consistent way. So
Yeah.
it's important, and you got to build these things, and there is a bit of design and engineering to them, and so but it's a really, really important pattern.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So I will. So yeah. So that's the entity transfer. So if you basically want your tool to participate in site imports, right? And I'll show you the UI. So I'm just starting my Tomcat up because it seems to crash. So I'm doing that in parallel. If you want your tool to participate in site import, then you have to implement this interface, entity transfer, right? I will quickly hop across to the assignment tool again, assignment service, I should say. And if I go, copy, you'll see that the assignment tool has implemented this. So you're seeing the method fingerprint there, right? From context to context, entity IDs, that's what these are. And some of the transfer options flavor of the method, right? And all it does, it just goes through, it does its own internal service stuff. It gets the assignments for the context. I think it probably flattens the IDs on them and things like that. And then it creates a new set of assignments, I'm guessing, in the new site, right? You know, with that material, right? It'll get the assignment, remove the ID, and then save it into the new site, setting the context on it. You don't need to know that, but that's assignment's way of doing it, right? So assignments is saying, yeah, I can transfer entities, right? I can do that. Just send me the stuff you want doing, right? You know, send me the contexts that you want to copy things between. Send me a list of IDs that you want to transfer, and I'll sort that out. You don't have to worry about it anymore, yeah?
Right. And the key thing is this is where inside the assignment service is where code that is aware of the assignment's internal data model happens. And so this is like, loading a thing with one primary key and making a copy of it and then storing it with a different primary key, that kind
Yeah,
of stuff. And that doesn't have to be in the import export code.
yeah, exactly. Exactly, yeah. Right. So I'm just quickly showing you that because I'm going to go over to the site management tool in a second. It's a lot of code there. I mean, assignments is a complex tool. So as you'd expect, there's quite a lot of things you've got to make sure you've got squared away when you're copying assignments, because you're copying assignments. Maybe there's submissions, maybe you don't want the submissions to come across because the particulars of a student in a site and blah blah blah. So you've got to kind of make sure that you look after all that stuff. But that is up to assignments. That is assignment's job, right? It's not the entity manager's job. The entity manager's job is just to pass on the requests and go, yeah, okay, can you please transfer these things? Yeah. Don't get phased by how complex that looks. You can ignore all this stuff, right? I mean, your tool will probably be a lot simpler if you were writing a tool. You just be like, you're copying a page, you're copying the titles and content, and that's probably about it, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Maybe
when we get to
change.
pages, it's going to be a lot easier.
Yeah, you'll be changing URLs obviously inside the content like we do and things, but okay. Yeah, and here's the cleanup version of that, right? So this will be a lot shorter. It's just gonna delegate to to that version, right? So well, first of all, it's going to remove all the assignments from the target site. So to context, it's going to go get all the assignments for it, grab the ID, delete assignment and all references. So it's saying just remove that, right? So it's cleaning out all the assignments from the target site, and then it's copying the stuff in from the source site, yeah. Again, this is my thing that I've just added, get entity map, which I'm not going to talk about. Tempting as it is, I'm not going to do because it's not in master. Okay, so let's go across to site management tool. Look at one of the scariest files in Sakai here, site action. 16,470 lines in this beauty, right? Okay. Right. So if I go thread like that. Yeah, what am I trying to show here? What am I trying to show? I'm trying to show
They're trying to show where the transfer copy entities is called.
yeah, it's
In
actually
a sense, simple that is, right? Because we delegated everything.
yeah. It's in the actual service. So what's it called? Hang on a minute. Yeah, the site action is just calling it. So, we need to actually go into the service. Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah. Okay. We know that's just like it calls a method and it's all done in a thread. But all this stuff here is just gathering all the IDs and the tools that we want to copy from the UI, which I'll show you briefly in a second. But I just want to show you initially the site managed service stuff. Service. Oops. Here we go. Right, so this is that method there that's being called by the front end code. So site action is in the servlet layer, right? This is in the service layer of the site management tool. Yeah, sometimes we call it site info, but the site management tool. So this will basically be calling all the transfer stuff in here, right? So if we scroll down here, we've got a method called import tools into site. If we look at that, this is where the stuff's happening, the actual calls are happening. Transfer, there we go, transfer copy entities. Right, so the site managed service is basically calling the actual entity manager, right? So if you look down here, right, offer to all entity producers. So we are basically calling the entity manager. We're saying, give me your list of entity producers. Right. This is interesting code because it's like it's an inversion of an inversion, really, right? This is a tool, the site management tool, right, which presents all the UI for migrating content between sites or all the checkboxes and everything, right? Again, I'll show you in a second. But what it's doing inside, it is actually hooking itself into the entity producer list from the entity manager, right? It's going, give me all your entity producers, right? If this producer is an entity transferer, right? If it's capable of transferring entities, cast it into a transferer, right? And then actually call it, right? Call it. That's happening down here. So we're going entity transferer, transfer copy entities. Now that, in the case of the assignments tool, that is going to call that method we've just looked at in the assignment service, right? And that is literally, it's abstracted away, right? The site management tool doesn't have to have the list of all the tools in Sakai. It doesn't have to have the assignment service. It doesn't have to have announcements or resources or whatever inside it, right? It doesn't have to be tightly coupled to all those things. It does all this work through the entity management system, right? All we have to do is go get entity producers. We just get this kind of abstract, this interface entity producer, right? It could be anything. It could be the assignment service or whatever, right? As we've just looked at in the assignment service. It's going, are you an entity transfer? If you are, then transfer these entities, right? And then we're done. That's the end, right? As far as site manager is concerned, it doesn't it doesn't have to deal with how to transfer those entities. The tool does it. The tool does it.
So the high level summary of this is that line that your cursor is on.
Yeah.
If we hadn't done all of this entity stuff, everything, that itself would be perhaps a 5,000 line long case statement,
Yeah, it would, yeah.
right? Right.
Yeah.
That line represents 5,000 lines of code, but instead of putting it here in the tool that's doing the site copying, those 5,000 lines of code are where they should be. And that is, 450 is in this service, 450 is in that service, 25 is in that service, 1,100 is in some other service. And so basically, you could literally, and if you're not disciplined the way we are in Sakai with this entity manager capability, this would be a case statement. And this would be one of the most brittle parts of the code base, meaning that if
Yeah.
you went and changed the assignment service and changed the data model in the assignment service, you have code that's data model aware in the assignment service, and then code that's data model aware in the site copy service. And believe me, a developer is not going to remember to go over and then into the import export. This code would slowly but surely just kind of just rot after a while. And then,
Yeah.
because we don't do this often enough. Now, that doesn't mean that it doesn't need to get looked at in the assignments tool, but at least when you're changing assignments and you're looking at all the things that are like doing stuff, you're working in the assignment service and you're fixing the assignment service and you're fixing the site copy aspects of assignment service all in the assignment service.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and so and this um, the site action that you went through a little bit before, you saw a lot of imports at the beginning, like a zillion of them. And that wasn't to make this part work. This part doesn't need those, but there's other parts in site action that are kind of older and more crufty in their ways. And we haven't yet gotten rid of all that stuff. But in this transfer copy entities, when we're copying from one site to another, which is one of the most difficult things a learning management system can do, and that is copy. And we get, lots of bug reports, lots of feature requests, and it is something that an LMS has to do that normal software doesn't necessarily have to be this complex. So we can't eliminate the complexity because it's all required, but we can limit where we sort of schlep dependent code that's dependent on data model. We want to keep that out of this code here in site manage and move that code into the assignments service. And you could, we won't do this today because we're about out of time, but I'm sure that it would mean that you could do unit tests inside the assignment service for the entity producer parts of it. And that way that every time you change something in assignment service and you recompile it and run unit tests, you could be testing. And when we do pages, it'll be simpler than assignments. Assignments is a monster. But if we do pages and we're starting to implement all this stuff, it'll be good. And it might be a little tricky to figure out how to do it if you haven't already done it before. Because I don't know, did you, when you did conversations, did you unit test the transfer copy entity stuff? Or did you just test it with the import tool?
I don't even know if I've implemented it, to be honest.
Yeah, okay. Well,
It's good.
in pages, we'll make a note to ourselves, right? So that if you
Yeah.
imagine by keeping that inside the pages service, then we
Yeah.
can unit test how pages participates in site copy and
Yeah.
then avoid regressions from
Yeah. Exactly.
changes
Yeah.
in how we do things in pages, making it so that we don't see the errors until QA decides to do a script that includes pages and includes a site copy and then checks everything to see if it's whatever. But imagine what
Yeah.
we can do in a unit test and do it in, a tenth of a second every time you compile Sakai.
Yeah.
And this, like I said, site copy is one of the most difficult things to do in a learning management system, and one of the most important things to do. Oh, okay. Now we're going to get to see it.
Yeah. We're gonna see it. We're gonna see it. Yeah, you'll see the
Might have
it's,
wanted to start with this, Adrian.
no, nah, not really. I don't think so, man, because this is specific
Okay.
to to site import, right? And I wanted to talk about the entity stuff, just the
Yeah.
underlying ethos behind it, right? At first. So
But
I mean,
ultimately,
this is
what
just
it means is what you're about to do. You're going to say, see this checkbox? The site copy code that we're import from site code we're running here. There's no idea what this checkbox is or what it means because it's all
yeah,
delegated into something else. So keep going.
yeah, exactly. So I've clicked I want to merge my data, right? I get a list of sites. So I've got template sites now that we can copy stuff from, which is great. I'm going to pick those two sites. We'll click continue, and then we get this grid of stuff, right? So across the top, we've got the sites. Down the left, we've got the tools, right? So if we go through and check these various boxes, right, what we're saying is we're saying we want all of the announcements from Playpen 10, right? And we want all of the assignments for Playpen 10, right? And this information is like a lot of form parameters, right? They go back to site action. Site action processes all those form parameters, which is quite complicated, and then it passes them on to site managed service, which then looks up the entity producers and calls them if they're transferers, right? It says transfer these things, right? Transfer them. Now, these will not show unless these things are already entity transferers, right? We don't just show random stuff here, right? The site action code is smart enough to know, like, not to show things that that can't transfer already, right? So that would never happen where that thing would fail. It'd go, oh, you're not a transfer. I can't, But the thing I've been adding is this basically. So I've added these chevrons here, right? So inside in that interface in entity transfer, that list of IDs, I don't know how often that's ever been used, that list of IDs, right? Because in Site Manage, you've never been able to pick items before, particular items for a tool. All you've ever been able to do is just, select the checkbox, right? And you get everything for that tool, yeah? So I'm now using that part of that method signature. I'm using those IDs. I'm saying, right, if I uncheck that and I just check that, we're just going to get Playpen 10, right? Playpen 10 assignment 2, right? If I check that, we're going to get everything from the Playpen 5 side, right? We're going to get all the assignments from that, yeah. So I've made it more fine grained. But the interesting thing for me is I've used a part of that method signature that I don't know where else that was actually used before. I don't know, maybe it's in the LTI stuff somewhere. I'm not sure, but like I don't see it used in any other tool where you can say I just want these entities. I don't want all of them for the site. I just want these.
So what
So yeah,
happens on the Chevron for overview and announcements, or you haven't built that yet?
not built it yet. No, it's a tricky one, right? So yeah, okay. So we're running out of time, but there's an interface called content exists aware, right? And it's one of the entity interfaces. It's just got one method, which is has content, right? With a site, where you pass a site ID to it, yeah. Not used anywhere. Maybe it's been used in a contrib tool somewhere, right? That's what I suspect. Okay,
Yeah, you
because
mentioned that earlier.
yeah, yeah. So I've implemented it for assignments as part of this work I'm doing. Yeah. So I've said, I've implemented content exists aware. And if it has, if you do a count of the assignments in a site, it returns true. Yeah, I've got content, right? And then this stuff will be shown, right? What we want to do really, I think, is start to propagate the use of that interface across the other tools. Because what happens at the minute, and this is getting a bit deep into this stuff, right? What happens at the minute is uh, the site management service will ask the entity transferer, right, if it has content. So if it implements that interface, that capability, I can go and have a look at this code quickly. I think it's in the action as content. Yes, here is this. Is this it? No, it's not. It's that one. Wrapped. Here we go. I think this is it. There you go. Right. So this is classic, right? So has content. So this is the internal method that we've implemented in site action, right? Like a wrapper around it, right? We're saying, has this tool got content for this site, right? So that tool for that site. We're asking the entity manager for the entity producers again. We're checking whether it's an entity transfer. We're casting it, right? And then what we're doing is we're saying, oh, are you are you aware of content that exists for this site? Yeah. So we're saying, are you a content exists aware, interface? Is that what you are, right? If we are, we're casting it into it, and then we're saying, has content for this site, and returning it. Yeah. Now, previous to me doing this particular Jira that I'm working on, no other tool in Sakai implements any of it, implements has content. So historically, this has just dropped through to this return true here, right? So that's why you get tools in there. You know what I mean?
So
But what we re
is that really saying when you got that other one, is that when the little options things pops up when it has content is true?
no,
Or is
no,
that
no,
just
no.
the tool? That's just the tool showing up.
Yeah, that's just the tool showing. Options is a different thing.
Okay, okay. That's okay.
Yeah, what this will do, right? So if you have
In the
multiple
old
sites,
days before this, did all the tools show up in that list in that UI basically, but some of the tools didn't do anything?
yeah, that's right. All the tools that implement entity transfer, they'll
Yeah.
show up. They will show up, even if they've not got any content. That's what happens, I'm afraid. Yeah, it's true. So what we really need to do, and this is kind of the point that I was trying to get to through the entire second half of this video is I think this content exists aware interface is great. And I think we should implement this on as many tools as we can, right? Because then we can make the site import screen a lot more compact, right? If there's only two tools that have got any content in the source, again, this this call only applies when you've got multiple sites, when you've picked multiple sites, which strangely enough, I don't understand why this is only when you're merging as well. If you're replacing content, you only ever pick one site because they're radio buttons. No idea why. I don't really understand that at all. I'm going to look at that. But when you're merging content, you can pick multiple sites. You get all the site columns. Sometimes, those tools might not have content for like the third site, but it'll have content for the other sites, right?
Right.
Do you know what I mean? But if you've got a tool that's an entity transfer, it will show up. So I think that by implementing this, we can make it a bit more responsive, that interface, or a bit more compact. If those tools don't have any content, right, we can show no content in the box or whatever, right, or something more useful. Yeah. So I think it's a good interface, and I think it was a good idea to add it. But we need to implement it. So this is something people can be looking at, right? This is something that people can be looking at. They can look at some tools that site import works with, like announcements is a classic, resources, and they can start to think about whether they can implement this interface on that tool. So it says, well, actually, I've got no content for that site. I have nothing for that site. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So I'm going to ask the big question, and I think I know the answer, and that is, how hard is it for lessons to learn to jump through this hoop?
Shouldn't be very hard at all. I mean,
I think that'd be impressive if it did, right? If
yeah, I don't think it'd be
if
hard. I
you
mean, it's
could,
just
I think where we're going with this, imagine if you go back in your UI and go back to the screen where after you said, please merge, and just go
yeah,
back Go back to
Yeah.
that screen. See, I think the way to think of, just click on I like to merge um, my
Yeah.
data. So imagine that you might have a template site that you want to pull all your lessons content from.
Hmm.
And you have last semester's site, which you want to pull all your assignments from, or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Or or you might have a template site and you want to pull a bunch of static, mostly static lessons content from a template site. And then
Yeah.
you might have last semester's, which has like one bit of lessons content, right? So, and so that way you can say, okay, that's the template site. Take this, and this from the template site, and take those two things from last semester's site, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's where this becomes a really powerful, powerful mechanism. Um, just or imagine that the template site gets updated semester after semester. It's an algebra class, and this is just a bunch of algebra lectures that change
Yeah.
gently and slowly, but then
Yeah.
they're kind of like your little um, lessons that have to do with uh, speakers in class or class discussions that you've
Yeah.
added on top of those lectures. And so I think if we start thinking this as more and more like a repository of courses or a repository of course templates, and the best use of those course templates when you're thinking about a session upon session after session after session, using course templates as part of each of the sessions, I think what you're doing is really pretty cool, right? So that
Yeah.
playpen 4 would be Algebra 1 lectures.
Yeah.
And you might have another one up there called Algebra 1 exams,
Yeah.
or common exams. And you might say, I'd like to go and grab the Algebra 1 lectures. And I'm going to go in Algebra 1 exams, and there's a bunch of exams. But then within that, you'll be like, okay, I want these 3 exams and all the 14 other ones I don't want. And so
Yeah.
you're kind of you got many, many places to sort of construct what it is that you want to do this semester from various sources. So that's really cool. And I mean,
Yeah.
I look forward to when we start pushing this into lessons, because I can imagine that from one semester, either if you're going from one semester to another, or you're going from a template, you just aren't going to want it all. You're going to want some of it. And the whole thing
Yeah.
about
Makes sense. Yeah.
give me the IDs and this, that, and the other thing. So
Yeah.
just cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have anything else to wrap up? We're about out of time.
Not really. I mean, it's been a complicated session. I mean, there's the entity stuff in Sakai has been around for a long time. It's powerful, but not widely understood. We do need to document it more. I think that looking at the entity transfer stuff is a good way of getting into it a bit, I think that's a good way of approaching the entity manager subsystem, and it
So
will help us massively if people do want to look at that stuff.
yeah, and so one of my secret hidden agendas for this whole Sakai Developer School is that it is my belief, and I'm pretty sure I'm right, that the way we teach object-oriented programming in higher education is inadequate, just completely flawed and inadequate. Because we teach, here's an animal object, and then we're going to inherit from the animal object and make a cat, and then we are
Yeah.
going to inherit from the animal object and make a dog. And if I give you a quiz, then somehow you now are an expert in object-oriented programming.
Yeah.
And the answer is no, you're not. As a matter of fact, that whole thing is such a rare actual application of object-oriented programming that
Yeah.
it's really a disservice to teach students that that is what object-oriented programming is. That's maybe the syntax of object-oriented programming. What's an interface? What's an implementation?
Yeah.
But then if we look at what you just talked about today, as rough and tumble as it was, um, this is how professionals use object-oriented programming, right? Meaning that we don't want to splatter code all over our code base that depends on the internal data model of assignments. case we want to change that, right? And so
Yeah.
we need to gather functionality together, but we also, our application is intricate and complex. And so how is it that you kind of gather the code that knows about the data model into one nice place where it's maintainable, testable, and most importantly, evolvable and changeable without having to grep the whole code base and say, oh yeah, that's right. I just broke this other code somewhere far off, far field because I renamed a column in a
Yeah.
database. These things happen.
Yeah.
Or I added a soft delete. And so now the delete has a new column called deleted, but then you got to check that deleted all over the place, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you got code splattered everywhere that does all that stuff, you know, what do you do when you're doing a transfer copy on soft stuff, right? What if you have a soft
Yeah.
deleted assignment and now you got a transfer copy, but maybe what you do is then you want an option that says copy soft deleted or don't copy soft deleted. And that might only be something the assignments tool knows about and cares about and has to inject itself into the site copy tool to say,
Yeah.
put up a checkbox for me that says whether or not you want soft deleted items copied. Do you want that? But the problem is if then we had to put an if statement in the site copy tool, the day we add whether or not soft deletes get copied, on that day, we then have to change both places and remember to change both places and remember to
Yeah.
test both places. And so that's the way we want to delegate all that into one little world. So, you know, Earl knows a lot about assignments. You know a lot about gradebook. I know a lot about LTI. And it keeps you from having to know about LTI in the site copy code. And it keeps you from
Yeah.
having to know about assignments in the site copy code and frankly gradebook, because when you worked on gradebook that was like a year and a half ago, and you really don't want to be looking at gradebook code when you're trying to fix site copy.
No,
As
definitely
a
not.
developer you just can't put it all in your head, and if we
No.
sneak all these little code chunks all over the place, nobody will be able to do their job. You know,
No.
you and I both need to be able to context switch when we're coding to know this is the world I'm working on today.
Yeah.
And and yes, while you're doing site copy, you have to go in and add a bit to these services, but at least you know that the future maintainers of those services will be able to fully maintain those services and not have to go back to site copy.
Yeah.
And so this is, to me, the essence of grown-up, real-world, object-oriented programming.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
And the only thing's a
Yeah.
little disappointed is it's not documented as well as it should be.
Yeah. Agreed.
As a teacher, I wish it were. I wish we could take this lesson and say, hey, go read a book on, you know, a book written by Adrian Fish called, you know, Advanced Object Orientation and Inversion of Control and Data Local, you know, Code Dependency Locality, blah, 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 blah. You know, it's like 40-word title that you could just go read the book. And they're like, oh, yeah, of course, that's how you do it. Just like
Yeah.
go back to like back when we first started and we had things like inversion of control and dependency injection. People
Yeah.
wrote books on that stuff, right?
Yeah.
And they were patterns that were communicated. And we have
Yeah.
patterns inside Sakai that are not well communicated, so they can't
Hmm.
be used as good educational examples of how
Yeah.
professionals solve these really hard problems.
Yeah.
So, so I think this is good. I think, you know, part of this education is to come back and revisit it after a while and make the world better. And we're seeing things like you're already making the world better in the middle of the time in which we're writing this pages tool. You sort of showed us and shared with us the parts of the world you're making better, which is the site copy, which is really important to Sakai. So,
Yeah.
okay, any last words before I shut the recording off?
No, no, that's it. That's it. Thanks
Okay,
for
well,
viewing,
thanks.
everybody.
And we'll see everybody in 3 weeks because I'm off to India. So I will see everybody after India.